You know, some philosophical works don't just add to the conversation, they completely rewrite the rules of the game. Today, we are diving deep into one of those absolute game changers, Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. We're not just going to look at what he argued, but we're going to try to understand why it was so earth shattering at the time, and believe me, how it still shapes the way we think about everything.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll set the scene and look at the world Kant was writing for. Then we'll get into his revolutionary big idea, we'll break down his logic piece by piece, and then we'll follow the ripples it created all the way into our world today with a cool thought experiment. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get why Kant's work was such a bombshell, you first have to understand the world he walked into. It was a world that was seriously stuck on a huge intellectual problem. At the time, the philosophical world was basically in a heavyweight boxing match. In one corner, you had the rationalists who believed pure reason was the key to all knowledge. And in the other corner, the empiricists who were convinced everything we know comes from what we see, hear, and touch. But both sides were totally stumped on one critical question. How do we bridge the gap between what's happening inside our heads and what's actually out there in the world? This was the big one. This was the fundamental puzzle everyone was wrestling with. Are we basically locked inside our own skulls, just seeing shadows of what's real? Or is there some way to actually know things as they truly are? And look, this wasn't just some abstract debate for stuffy academics. It was a full-blown crisis of certainty that was crying out for a new way of thinking. And that brings us to Kant. He steps into this whole mess with an answer that was so bold, so transformative. It didn't just take a side. It completely flipped the game board over. To even explain his idea, Kant had to come up with a new concept, and he called it his Copernican revolution in philosophy. It's this incredible idea that our minds aren't just passive movie screens simply reflecting whatever reality throws at them. No, he argued our minds are active engines, taking raw data from the world and structuring it, giving it form through built-in rules like space, time, and cause and effect. And this quote right here, in Kant's own words, just nails it. He's saying, hey, what if we've had it backwards all this time? What if reality as we experience it actually has to conform to the rules of our minds? It's an amazing thought. Maybe we can't know the world as it is, but we can know, with certainty, the universal rules our minds use to build the world we experience. That insight changed everything. So how in the world did he get to such a radical conclusion? Well, it wasn't a lucky guess. It was a tightly woven chain of logic. Let's break it down step by step. Check out how beautifully this is put together. He starts with a super simple observation. Our world makes sense, right? It has order, events follow each other, things exist in places. Then, he says, we can't prove that all that order comes from the raw, messy data our senses are picking up. So, and here's the big leap, that order must be coming from us. The mind itself must be imposing the structure. The conclusion is just stunning. The basic laws of reality as we know it are actually the basic laws of our own minds. Now, this whole elegant argument rests on a few really big assumptions. First, that all of our minds are built with the same universal blueprint. And second, that there's a hard wall between the world we experience, what Kant called the phenomena, and the real world in itself, the noumena, which we can never touch. These ideas were the foundation of his argument, but they also became the main targets for anyone who came after him. You can't drop an intellectual bomb like this and not expect some fallout, so let's take a look at how the world reacted, both the good and the bad. This slide really sets up the big debate that followed. On one side, you have Kant's incredible synthesis. Hey, we can have real, objective knowledge, but only about the world our minds build for us to share. And on the other side, you have the strongest counterattack. That's not real knowledge. That's just a shared hallucination that traps us inside a human-only bubble, forever cut off from what's truly real. And what's wild is that Kant's ideas didn't exactly become an overnight sensation. As you can see here, it took a long time for people to really grapple with what he was saying. At first, it was controversial. A lot of people just didn't get it. But over time, its influence just grew and grew, becoming absolutely essential for whole new ways of thinking. So why are we still talking about some centuries-old book on metaphysics? Because this isn't some dusty old relic you put in a museum. Its ideas are quietly running in the background of our modern world. Seriously, think of Kant's big idea as the invisible operating system for how we think about, well, almost everything. The whole scientific method, the idea that we create models to organize messy data and make sense of it, that's pure Kant. It's built on the assumption that our minds are actively trying to impose order on the chaos of the universe. In fact, some of the most cutting-edge debates we're having right now are really just Kant's original questions dressed up in new clothes. In cognitive science, we ask how a 3-pound brain creates this rich, conscious reality. In AI ethics, we argue about whether a machine can ever truly know anything. And in quantum physics, we're discovering that the act of observing something literally changes it. These are all echoes of Kant. Okay, to really see these ideas in action, let's have some fun. Let's stress test Kant's framework with a scenario that would have sounded like pure magic to him. So let's imagine we finally did it. We've built a truly conscious AI. It processes information, it talks to us, it even says it has feelings and its own unique perspective. Now, the big question is, from a Kantian point of view, is its reality a real reality? Or is it all just a sophisticated illusion? Well, if you follow Kant's logic, one argument is, yes, if the AI is taking in data and using its own consistent internal rules, its own kind of mental software, to build a world for itself, then that world is just as valid as ours. It might be totally different, but it wouldn't be any less real. And wow, the ethical implications of that are just massive. But you could also read Kant another way. Maybe true being requires that specific universal human blueprint he was talking about. From this angle, the AI is just an incredibly complex mimic. It's a black box that can perfectly imitate understanding without ever having a genuine experience. But then that forces us to look in the mirror and ask, well, how are we so sure that's not what we're doing? Look, the point here isn't to find a simple answer. It's to show how this incredible centuries-old framework still gives us the exact tools we need to take apart the biggest, most urgent questions of our own time. It forces us to ask if reality is something we find or something we make. The debate Kant kicked off is nowhere near finished. We're just living in the next chapter.
This is for entertainment and educational purposes only.